We've got training camp questions that need to be answered, and one of them is not whether or not Jayden Daniels is the franchise's savior, because we can't possibly answer that before the end of training camp. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, part of Sports Illustrated. I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you coming through today, every dayers. You already know, but I'm telling you anyway, greatly appreciate you coming through every single day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. If you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this episode. On today's episode, we're going to talk about some money matters. We're going to talk about one money matter that has to do with fans, one that has to do with the NFL, with the Washington Commanders NFL salary cap, and a player in question, specifically Brandon Aiyuk. We're also going to talk about the starting quarterback dilemma, if it's a dilemma, once again. And we're going to start off with the fact that Jayden Daniels' future is actually not a question that we can answer by the end of training camp. If you want to discuss this episode and anything we discussed in the episode, or anything else Washington Commanders related, all you got to do is reach out, send me a text, and you can do that by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become a Locked On Commanders insider today, and from there you can send me text messages. I'll be sending you text messages. You'll get your answers to your questions. We'll get content, analysis, inside information, live text from games, practices, press conferences, a whole lot of stuff going on over there. And the best part is you don't need to download anything. You don't need any hashtags. You don't need any filters. You just grab your phone, and next thing you know, we are talking. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to do that today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. Everybody wants to know, is Jayden Daniels going to be the savior for the Washington Commanders franchise? And everybody's in a hurry to figure it out. They want to watch the tape. They want to watch the LSU tape. They want to watch the practice film. They want to talk to him. They want to ask him questions. They want to know, is he the savior? But the truth of the matter is we cannot answer that question before the end of training camp. Honestly, you can't answer that question before the end of preseason. Honestly, you can't answer that question before the end of this season either. In fact, if you ask me, it's probably going to take at least 2 years, I would say, to actually know whether or not Jayden Daniels can or will rather resurrect this franchise. And that's how we're going to start off this mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders, our first and only off-season, or dead period, I should say, mailbag of the off-season here before we hit the training camp. And that question or comment and question comes in from Insider James, who wrote in and said, can we actually tell if Jayden Daniels is a franchise savior after training camp? Because I keep hearing people talking about figuring that out at training camp as a big question for the team, but I don't think that's possible. If not, what are your 3 training camp questions that are actually answerable? And yeah, James, I think that you make a very valid point, right? You cannot know 100% without any uncertainty whether or not Jayden Daniels is going to be the franchise quarterback and the franchise savior for this organization. And Washington fans, you know that better than a lot of other fan bases because you've been through this dance. You've been through Heisman Trophy, drafted number 2 overall pick, comes in, sets the NFL world on fire, offensive rookie of the year, looks like he's going to be the franchise savior, and then he's not the franchise savior for multiple different reasons. Injury also a big part of that as well with Robert Griffin III. So you know better, like I said, than most franchises out there what can happen to a quote-unquote franchise savior even after an amazing start, even after an amazing first season and all kinds of potential being shown. I've said it on this show time to time. Every day, as you probably remember hearing me say this, it's really, really hard to win in the National Football League. It's hard to be really good in the National Football League, but it's harder to be really good 2 years in a row or 3 years in a row or 4 years in a row. That is where the greatest of the great come from. And when you talk about Jayden Daniels being a franchise savior, if he's going to be a franchise savior, that's really what you're talking about. Is he's going to have this CJ Stroud type of debut, and then you have to continue that on. Now, even if he doesn't have a CJ Stroud rookie season, doesn't mean he's not going to be the franchise savior. It just means it might take him a little bit more time. This team might need put a little bit more around him. because at the end of the day, no matter how great a quarterback might be, none of them does it by themselves. So let's just get that 100% clear. Saying that a quarterback might need a little bit of help here or there does not mean they won't be or can't be one of the greats that have ever played the game. It just means they're human. It just means that they don't have superpowers, right? So I think that it's a very astute observation by James here, and I know some other people have kind of been talking about this as well, that putting the pressure of let's figure out if Jayden Daniels is going to save this franchise by the end of August, like that's a little much. It's a little high. Now we're going to have plenty of opinions and people are going to have plenty of things to say. What I can tell you that we can answer is, can I get a feel for whether or not Jayden Daniels is capable of being the savior of the franchise? I think I can do that. You know what I mean? But even if I tell you the end of August, like this guy's got all the tools, this guy's got the ability, doesn't mean he's going to do it, right? Sam Howell had enough tools and enough ability. I believed, and I still believe to this day, that he has enough tools, enough ability to be a franchise quarterback for somebody. But again, he can't do it by himself. He can't do it when he's under pressure all the time. And then he can't do it if his confidence is completely shot. So Jayden Daniels is going to have a lot of those questions. And for me, you want to know 3 questions I think we actually can answer before the end of training camp. And we're going to get more deeper into some of these training camp questions as we get closer to training camp, which starts next week. Rookies are reporting this week, but actual training camp starts next week. First and foremost, and then again, I don't want to put these in any exact order, but the first question I'm going to bring up, how's the backfield going to operate, right? If you read all the national pundits and you read all the national outlets and the websites that kind of cover the NFL from a holistic or from a general, from an eagle eye standpoint, Austin Eckler is running back number 1. If you ask me, Brian Robinson is running back number 1. I think if you ask most people who've actually been in Ashburn for OTAs and minicamp, Brian Robinson Jr. is running back number 1. The other part of that question is, does it matter? Does it matter who's on the field first? Does it matter who's on the field the most? Does it matter who's getting the most touches? Does it matter who gets the most catches, the most carries? No, at the end of the day, it doesn't. But it is going to be interesting to see how this backfield forms, how Cliff Kingsbury plans to use them. We'll get a little bit of taste of that during training camp, during the preseason, all those things. And of course, we already know that even during training camp preseason, we're only going to see a limited scope of what it is that the coaches want us to see. But that, to me, is a very big part of this Jayden Daniels equation, is how often and how much or in what style will the running backs be used and in what combination. And I think the third running back is also going to be important. If it's Chris Rodriguez, kind of more of a bowling ball type up the middle type of guy to help in short yardage situations, I think that kind of speaks to something. If it's Jeremy McNichols, who I think still has some of that between the tackle, between the guards type of ability, but also has a little bit more probably proven agility and outside ability, I think Chris Rodriguez still has a good amount of that too. I think it kind of tells you a direction they're going with the backfield. Or if it's one of these other guys that kind of comes out of nowhere and surprises and makes an active roster or claims an active roster spot. Certainly, I think that third spot is open to debate. Another question I think that we actually can answer before the end of training camp is the secondary improved? Now, make sure you remember I said it that way, right? Is the secondary improved? I didn't say, is the secondary going to be one of the best, or is the secondary going to stop people better than it did last year? Just, is this secondary improved? Is Jeremy Chin going to make an impact as a strong safety? Is Quan Martin as a quote unquote full-time free safety that looks like he is now going to be able to take that next step? Is Emmanuel Forbes or Michael Davis going to be a sufficient starting cornerback, opposite of Benjamin St-Juste? And is Benjamin St-Juste actually a solidified starter on the other side? And then Mike Sainer still in the nickel. Is he going to make that transition to the NFL game smoothly, quickly, or is he going to need some growing period? We can answer that by the end of training camp. I can't tell you that they're going to be top 20, top 15, top 12, top 10 secondary, but I can tell you if this unit looks better than it did last year. And I think it's a very important part to what Washington is trying to do this year. And then finally, is the offensive line capable of protecting Jayden Daniels enough? And again, I put it that way for a very specific reason, right? Capable of doing it. I think we can tell. We'll be able to tell through these joint training practices, training camp practices. We'll be able to tell during the preseason a little bit. I think we'll get an idea of whether or not this offensive line is going to be a contributor or going to be a detractor and be something that Jayden's got to succeed in spite of versus succeeding with them. And by enough, the scheme also has a part to do with that, right? Coaching schemes and play calls have just as much to do with protecting the quarterback as the offensive line does, I believe. If you've got a weak side, roll away from that side, overprotect that side, play action to that side to stop, to slow down the pass rush on that side, things like that. There's scheme things, there's play calling things that Cliff Kingsbury can do to help that offensive line, help Jayden Daniels. So I do think we can get a good glimpse of those three things. But another question we got to answer, not only should Jayden Daniels get preseason snaps, should he even start the regular season? That's our next question in the mailbag. I'm going to tell you right now, there is some logic to Jayden Daniels not starting to begin his rookie season. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. We love sports. I love sports so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games, and the sports just aren't sportsing the way that we want them to. Thankfully, we've got the Olympics to kind of fill that gap a little bit this year, but usually we don't even have that. But FanDuel does let us keep sportsing whenever we want to. And all we got to do is open the FanDuel app, dream up any bets you want to in the mood, and you are sportsing once again. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. On Tuesday, new customers, you get $200 in bonus bets if you make a $5 bet and it wins. And on Tuesday as well, you got a 30% profit boost from the 2024 All-Star Game, Major League Baseball All-Star Game, and a 30% profit boost from any WNBA bet. So plenty of boosts and bonuses going on to keep the sports sportsing. So head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Hall of Fame quarterback, Washington legend Joe Theismann mentioned that Jayden Daniels shouldn't take a snap during any of the preseason games this year for the Washington Commanders. But we've got an insider who wants to know if Jayden Daniels should even take the starting reps for the Washington Commanders the beginning of this season. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Every day, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Make sure you come back tomorrow. We got Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus, good friend of mine, buddy, back from our days on the Bucks beat together, coming through for the episode to talk about, of course, Jayden Daniels, Washington Commanders, Dan Quinn, and a whole bunch of other stuff. In the meantime, if you need more sports coverage, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Insider Willie came through with a question. What do you think about Marcus Mariota starting rather than Jayden Daniels to start the season? Do we have sufficient evidence to show whether sitting out for a couple of games actually helps a QB when they transition from college to pro? Willie, I think it is an amazing question. I think it's a very valid question. And I think it's one that the majority of the fan base would lose their minds over if it actually happened, because the impression I think that a lot of fans would have if this actually came to be where Marcus Mariota started the regular season instead of Jayden Daniels would be either the offensive line wasn't sufficient enough and they didn't do enough to go address it, because before we've even seen the offensive line, we know a lot of people already think that the team didn't do enough to address the offensive line. And I'm not even wanting to say or hint that that's necessarily unfair. The other part of that would be that Jayden Daniels isn't all that he's cracked out to be, that any good that we saw from him in OTA's minicamp was fool's gold, all that kind of stuff. And he's actually not going to be, there's going to be people already throwing around the bust tag, right? Because I can already see the comments coming in through YouTube. You have to start. If you draft a guy number 2 overall, you have to start him. But here's the thing. You don't actually have to start him just because you drafted him number 2 overall. Just because you drafted him number 1 overall, you don't have to start him, right? We use the word have to, or we use the phrase you have to do something very liberally these days in our society. And there's actually a lot of things that people will say you have to do that you don't actually have to do, right? And again, starting a rookie quarterback before he's ready is not one of those things that you have to do. And there are multiple reasons that your rookie quarterback may not be ready to start. One of those reasons may be you're not ready to play behind that offensive line, because that offensive line is not it. And yes, there are players out there. David Bakhtiari is one of those guys. There are other guys who were out there. Tyron Smith was one of those guys before he signed with the Jets and left the Cowboys. You could have overpaid to trade up and back into the first round and get one of those tackles. You could have reached a little bit in the second round and got one of the tackles that somebody else got over, say, a guy like Johnny Newton, who has yet to practice because of injury. There's a lot of things that, yes, this team could have done. Obviously, they did what they did. They made the decisions they made for whatever reasons that they have to make them, whether we agree with them or not. But here's the thing. There's actually a lot of intelligence to potentially not putting Jayden Daniels behind a suspect starting offensive line if the starting offensive line is indeed suspect, because Jayden Daniels is about the future, right? Like, let's be clear about that whole thing. You didn't draft Jayden Daniels for 2024. You drafted Jayden Daniels for 2024 and beyond. So the larger piece of that pie is the and beyond, right? The hope is 10, 12, 15 years of Jayden Daniels. Well, how do you protect the last 14 years? Let's say it's 15. How do you protect the last 14 years of your investment in Jayden Daniels when your first year he's going to be put in great jeopardy? Well, you just don't put him in jeopardy, right? You put Marcus Mariota out there. You tell Marcus, look, you're the veteran. You've been around the block. You've been behind some good O lines. You've been behind some bad O lines. That's what you're here for. You've got the experience. Go out there and handle this business. And let's try to give this offensive line 3, 4, 5 games to get gelled, to really start getting up to speed and all these things. And let's not put the pressure on our already suspect offensive line to say, hey, the franchise future is behind you. So while you're trying to figure this out, while you're struggling a little bit, while you're missing some cues, while you're going this way when your teammate thought you were going that way, by the way, the young kid back there is the next 15 years of this franchise, and you're letting him down. Let's not throw that pressure on top of him. Let's put a guy back there. Mark, and say, honestly, bro, look, you know what the deal is. You know the situation. Go out there and handle it the best way that you can. As far as whether or not there's actual data about a quarterback being helped by not going right on the field as a rookie, I don't know if there's actually that data. We can go through several different examples. Fans in Green Bay will swear to you that having a quarterback that doesn't start right away is actually the way to go, because Brett Favre, again, goes to Atlanta, isn't getting the playing time there, ends up going to Green Bay eventually, and then becomes a Hall of Famer. Aaron Rodgers sits behind Brett Favre, becomes a Hall of Famer. Jordan Love sits behind Aaron Rodgers, had a really good first year as a starting quarterback, right? I'm not going to call him a Hall of Famer yet. So certainly if you're in Green Bay, you'd be pounding the table saying, don't start your rookie quarterback his first year, because it's going to make him a lot better. But then there's other players out there who maybe didn't need necessarily all that time, and they were still, be able to ball. Again, you look at the CJ Strouds of the world, just the most recent example, and they'll say, no, put him out there right away. If you really believe in him, put him out there. But again, we put a lot of limitations on actions, right? We say, well, if you really believed in him, you'd put him out there. Well, it's not as easy as that. There's a lot of different contributing factors to what's going on a team, and whether or not you think your rookie quarterback is ready to handle that contextual situation. So what do I think about Marcus starting? I think if you're the Washington Commanders and you think your quarterback is going to be put in a perilous situation, a situation that is unfair for a young quarterback to be put into to start his career, then yeah, put Marcus Mariota in there. The other side of that is, I don't know that you can get away with doing it for a full year. 4 or 5 games max, sure. You know what I mean? Now, if you're winning, probably just keep it rolling, right? But the truth is, if you're starting Marcus Mariota, it's most likely because you don't trust your offensive line completely yet. And if you don't trust your offensive line completely yet, Marcus Mariota is probably not getting a lot of protection. So you're probably not going to win a lot of those first 4 or 5 games. So you bring Jayden in that time, but you give him some time to watch the game on the field, watch the game in tape, get some pointers from Marcus Mariota, and roll forward that way. So I think it's a valid question. And I think it's something that the Washington Commanders certainly have to think of. Don't just commit fully to being like, well, we picked number 2 overall. You're out there week 1, buddy. Good luck to you. Insider Frank came through. Here's the topic. I just don't think Brandon Aiyuk is coming to Washington. I think it's all self-generated hype by him to secure a deal with the 49ers. What is your gut telling you, Fran? I think that's a very astute observation. And I will tell you, just from paying attention to both sides of this thing, Brandon Aiyuk has said that his goal is to stay with the San Francisco 49ers. He wants a new contract with the 49ers. And yes, all of this stuff is to generate pressure on the 49ers to get a deal done. What kind of pressure? Public pressure, social media, fan base pressure, because the 49ers are in a championship window. Brandon Aiyuk is one of the best receivers in the NFL today. I'd say top 10 receivers in the NFL today. And the fan base wants a championship. This 49ers fan base knows what championship football looks like, just like the Washington football franchise, or just like Washington football fans know what championship football looks like. Just like you, they're starving for another championship. They want a title. They don't want a title run. They don't want to run to the Super Bowl. They want to win. They want a Super Bowl win. And they know that Brandon Aiyuk is part of that. So every time a story comes out or a quip comes out that says Brandon Aiyuk maybe wants to go to Washington, Brandon Aiyuk maybe wants to go to Pittsburgh, 49ers fans are adding the 49ers social media account. They're mentioning John Lynch in their mentions, all this stuff. And they're saying, dude, get it done. What are you doing? You're going to cost us a championship, all this other stuff. If Brandon Aiyuk ends up shipped out this season because they can't get a deal done and the 49ers get eliminated in the divisional round, people are going to start calling for John Lynch's job and Coach Shanahan's job. Like, that's just the nature of the beast. So that's absolutely 100% inducing or meant to induce pressure. Now, what is my gut telling me? My gut is telling me that Brandon Aiyuk is a San Francisco 49er for 2024. My gut is also telling me that Brandon Aiyuk may be a free agent in 2025 and may be interested in joining the Washington Commanders in 2025. And again, we already know that Adam Peters and John Lynch had conversations about trading Brandon Aiyuk to Washington ahead of the NFL draft. So obviously there is interest there. And the Washington Commanders are going to have a lot of cap space next year, just like they did this year. So my gut tells me that if Brandon Aiyuk is a Commander, it's in 2025, not in 2024. But the further this thing drags along, and we don't know yet, but if Brandon Aiyuk holds out a training camp, the longer that happens, the more this thing could come to roost. And I wouldn't count it out. I wouldn't count it out, but I would say, like, on a 10 scale, I think it's like a 3 out of a 10 chance that Brandon Aiyuk gets traded this year. And if he gets traded, possibly to the Washington Commanders. So that's what my gut is telling me. What my gut is also telling me is that DirecTV customers, NFL Sunday Ticket customers, you might have some money headed your way. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role you're trying to fill. And that's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. But LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively searching for a new job might be open to transitioning into the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get qualified candidates within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn knows the small businesses, you guys are wearing a lot of hats and you may not have all the resources and time to fully hire the way that you want to. So LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. 2.5 small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So I'd actually recorded this entire episode and was getting ready to sit down to edit it and get it polished up to publish on Tuesday night for our Wednesday episode. And the news came out, according to multiple outlets, that Brandon Aiyuk, San Francisco 49ers star wide receiver, has formally requested a trade. Now, how does that impact what I just said about everything Brandon Aiyuk related? Honestly, it doesn't really change anything. Again, it's just kind of another step in the process of a player trying to put pressure on the organization to make a deal. And actually, I won't say his name right, but Nick Wagoner, I believe, of ESPN, he covers the 49ers for ESPN. He's there, John Keim, right on the Washington Commanders beat, sent out a series of tweets shortly after the news came out, or following the news coming out, that basically pointed out the dates that the San Francisco 49ers had signed multiple key players on their roster, guys like Nick Bosa. And most of those extensions came late July, early August. I think Nick Bosa's was actually like September 6th that it was done. So it is not out of the ordinary for the 49ers to kind of take, into the offseason and even into the early part of the preseason ahead of the regular season to get these deals done. And Nick also mentioned a few 49ers players in the past who had requested trades in contract, debates and all that stuff, but then ended up re-signing with the team. So while Brandon Aiyuk, requesting a trade is certainly big news, certainly a needle mover, I don't know that it really changes the landscape of things as far as what we just talked about. The 49ers being in a Super Bowl window, they're going to want to keep them in, even if it's just for the 1 year, maybe give them 2 years worth of guaranteed money, something like that. But at the end of the day, my stance on the whole Aiyuk thing still kind of lives in never say never. You know what I mean? If you're really hopeful for it, don't necessarily count it out of the realm of possibility, but not sure. Still don't think it's very likely. Maybe it moves from a 3 to a 4. That Brandon Aiyuk might be moved this season if he is moved to the Washington Commanders. Wrapping up this mailbag episode here on Locked On Commanders, and we're coming through with insider Bill, who says, if the current ruling stands with damages, I and the 2.4 million other Sunday ticket subscribers will split $21 billion. Any snowball's chance in a Florida summer, this judgment will stand. Bill, I love the Florida analogy. I don't know. I'm trusting Bill here on the dollar amount, right? I know it's in the billions and all that stuff, but the bottom line is, recently the NFL was ruled to be in violation of antitrust laws and all this stuff, basically taking advantage of their product and taking advantage of the ability to restrict how many outlets fans have to watch NFL football on a regular basis, and overcharging while doing it. And because of the decision that was made in the civil suit, in the class action lawsuit, I should say, a lot of money is potentially going to be spent by the NFL to pay for their transgressions. Now, the NFL is appealing, of course, so this is not a done deal just yet. But the thing that's interesting about this case, Bill, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so let's just be clear here. But I do actually know a thing or two about some class action lawsuits because I've been a part of a couple, unfortunately. But the thing about class action lawsuits, right, is and really civil suits just in general. There does not have to be like the burden of proof in a civil case versus a criminal case is vastly different, right? Really, and I'm putting this in extreme layman's terms. So if you're a lawyer out there, please don't get mad at me because I'm a layman myself putting this in layman's terms, right? But basically, in a civil suit, just like you were a meanie head, you were a bad guy. Now pay money for it. That's essentially what you got to prove. And this whole thing started, my understanding of it anyway, I should say, this whole thing started as it was a direct lawsuit. There was a bar, I believe, in San Francisco that wanted to sue the NFL over the cost of the NFL Sunday ticket, and the case was thrown out. But then it got revived as a class action lawsuit, which involves everybody, right? So now it's not just me suing the NFL, it's our entire consumer base suing the NFL. Now it's different because now you don't get into did the NFL directly wrong somebody? You get into did the NFL participate in what I like to call toxic business practices or predatory business practices? That's a totally different ballpark. We're talking about a totally different set of rules here. So a lot of people are talking about like, well, this case was already thrown out once. You know what I mean? They just got lucky and got to pass this other court or whatever, so it's going to get tossed again. They're not necessarily the same things, right? The difference is, between like me suing my neighbor and all of my neighbors suing a city. Like it's totally different ball field as far as my understanding is. So is there a possibility the judgment will stand? There's absolutely a chance that the ruling will stand. I think there's actually a good chance that the ruling will stand because what the NFL did is they took their package, they took their product, right, which they knew was king in America, king of pro sports, and they said, we're going to let you have access to all of it, but you can only do it this one funnel. We're only going to give you one lane to do it in, and we're going to jack the price up. Like that thing was expensive, man. I'm also there with you, Bill. Like honestly, if this thing goes through, I'm with you. I'm in that group. You know what I mean? So yeah, I do think that there's a snowball's chance in Florida. Well, there's more than a snowball's chance in Florida. There's a snowball's chance in Pennsylvania in November. Can we put it that way? Like, I don't know if that I'm not from Pennsylvania, so I don't even know if it's that cold in Pennsylvania in November. But I think you get the idea. So I do think there's a possibility there as well. So a couple of money matters to end up the episode. Yeah, Brandon Aiyuk absolutely is after money from San Francisco 49ers. That's what all this is about. But there is a possibility that what he's doing does lead to him going elsewhere. And if he goes elsewhere, there is a possibility that that elsewhere location is Washington. And then, of course, the NFL and the NFL owners, which welcome the NFL Josh Harris. Here you go. You get to pay for this settlement. You're part of this settlement anyway. That's part of this whole thing as well. And yes, I do think that there's a possibility that Sunday ticket subscribers from the window, I think it was like 2011 to 2022. Please don't quote me on that, but I do believe that's the window if I remember correctly. Yeah, there's a possibility that if you want part of that settlement, you can possibly get part of that settlement. Now, I can also tell you from having been part of some of these types of situations in the past that it could take like a year or 2, 3 years to actually get hold of all this stuff and even get whatever share of the pot that you're going to get. But that's our mailbag episode for today, for this week or for the dead period here before training camp. Training camp starting next week. We're not going to have a mailbag episode next week. We're going to be doing a whole lot of previews, what we're looking for training camp. And yes, fantasy football players, I am still coming through with some fantasy football projections for you before we get to training camp. But coming up tomorrow, we got Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus. Maybe we'll talk about some fantasy football stuff with Trevor as well. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, throw them down in the YouTube comment section or text me directly. Become a Locked On Commanders insider to do that at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Don't forget to also check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through like you do on a regular basis. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind. We'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.